to dig up? Who would like to do for reading?
I'll start.
Then we have a nice short one, Mrs. Margaret Green Moses. She was the daughter of old John Green. Chief Thomas Green. Mrs. Elizabeth Locke Palace. No, it's okay. I do have some guys coming up. Mrs. Ellen Hill Miracle. Ellen Hill Miracle.
Since you had so many different things.
Yeah. Okay, Captain John. And another set, Captain John. And a big fat one of Captain John. And then a little one of Captain John. And then I just have a series of readings from the Simcoe Deed. Doesn't have something to read. Me. But you don't have to worry, it doesn't come for a while. Okay. Can you read or not? You got reading glasses or no?
No, why don't you just tell everybody?
Right. Cheryl?
No, I'm trying not to make that.
Pardon me?
I'm trying not to make that.
Somebody else out here?
Yay!
One more. So the victims. Okay. Do we need another introduction or just?
Karen, do you want to do an introduction? What we're doing?
Come on.
I'm holding the phone.
Hi everybody, welcome to Granny Day Library again, another Trish Talk. Today, sponsored by today it's the story of our leaving Fort Hunter and as we made our way here to the shores of the Bay of Quinte. So, Trish, welcome.
Seagull, everyone. Last time I forgot to use my language, which is like 5 words. So I can say hello and I can say thank you. So very important words. Yeah. So thanks for the opportunity to come. It's an honor, as always. There's a few things that are happening right now. They all kind of come together. Number one is that bus trip that's available. That you're going to be doing the boundary tour of the original Mohawk. There's also, this is April. This is the anniversary of the Simcoe Deed. And it's also leading up to next month, it's going to be the landing. So there's a few things all kind of coming together, so we're going to take an opportunity to celebrate each in their own way. So this month will be the 225th anniversary of the Simcoe Deed, which is a pretty big deal. And it is the original granting of land for the Mohawk Tract, and I've handed out on a modern plan the boundaries of this Mohawk Tract. So hopefully you'll be able to see a lot of that if you're in the bus trip. The Simcoe Deed says,
Know ye that whereas the attachment and fidelity of the chief warriors and people of the Six Nations to us and our government have been made manifest on divers occasions by their spirited and zealous exertions and by the bravery of their conduct. And we, being desirous of showing our approbation of the same, and in recompense of the losses they may have sustained, of providing a convenient tract of land under our protection for a safe and comfortable retreat for them and their posterity.
and that's who you are, posterity. You are the descendants of these people. So if we have a look at image number 1, so this is setting apart this as a homeland for the Six Nations, because the Simcoe Deed says it's to the chiefs, warriors, women, and people of the Six Nations. It comes to be known as the homeland of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. But where did they come from? So the ancestors of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte are from Fort Hunter, which is that tiny little purple dot down there in New York State.
Purple?
It's purple.
Do you want me to zoom in a little?
Yeah, if you can. Right there. Now you've got to get from there to where we are today, which is, I can find it, Fort Frontenac is here. So they're approximately where we are today. It's a big distance, it's a long trip, and we are talking about the 18th century. We're not talking about highways.
So
It's
we're
a
walking?
slog.
We're walking? How are we traveling? Walking?
A lot of it was walking. Walking until after Lachine, and then you've got boats.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little bit of a boat trip, but it wasn't unpleasant circumstances. So yeah, you're walking. You're walking with elders and children. So how did this all come about? So I'm going to take us back to the American Revolution. In the spring of 1776, there was a council held at Onondaga, and the Confederacy decided that they were going to remain neutral during the American Revolution. So that was their plan. Within the Mohawk Nation, you had people who supported the British, you had people who supported the Americans, and you had people who wanted to remain neutral. And this is probably true for the others of the Six Nations. But in January 1777, 3 of the principal sachems for the Onondagas died. And at that time, they covered the fire, the central fire. When they covered the fire, they never opened it again to go back and decide what they were going to do about the American Revolution. When they covered the fire, it's not extinguished, it's just covered until they get their sachems, the requisite number. When they decide to do that, every individual could choose for himself what they wanted to do. Did they want to be an ally of the British, an ally of the Americans, remain neutral, whatever they wanted to do. So in the summer of 1777, Joseph Brant is going around the different communities in what's now New York State, and he's trying to actively get people to take up the hatchet. You've heard the phrase, to go to war as an ally of the British against the Americans. And Captain John also decides to take up the hatchet too. And he, of course, he's a Fort Hunter Mohawk. Joseph Brant is a Contra Mohawk. I have a name for Captain John Deserontian, or Yo Deserontian, meaning the lightning has struck. It's the best explanation I've had so far of what his name means. So in the summer of 1777, there were a lot of skirmishes going on. One of them is the siege of Fort Stanwix. And there's a little place outside Fort Stanwix called Oriskany. And at Oriskany, there was an ambush. The British and their First Nations allies versus the Americans and their First Nations allies. And unfortunately, the First Nations allies for the Americans were Oneidas. So you had, within the Six Nations, you had Six Nation fighting Six Nation, and that broke the Great Law. And that just, the ramifications just like dominoes, bang, bang, bang. It was bloody, it was awful. If we go to image 2, I've been to Oriskany. This is, it looks very much, it's very, very wooded. It would have been horrible, bloody. It was in a valley. It was hand-to-hand combat. Yeah, the Senecas in particularly, they lost a number of their chiefs and warriors there. You can't see it very well, and I'm sorry about that, but right, that white thing in the middle is a plaque. They planted white pine. And it's also a place where people go to now to burn tobacco when they go to do ceremonies. It is a sad, sad place. But I would recommend it if anybody wanted to go to see it. It used to be it was a state park in New York State, and I think now maybe it's part of the National Park Service. Beautiful area, really gorgeous. I haven't been to Fort Hunter, but my understanding is that it's really beautiful there, so I encourage everybody to go. So in September 1777, the Americans and the Oneidas go into Fort Hunter and they loot the place. They burn the crops. It's horrible. They're getting revenge, right, for this ambush. And the Fort Hunter community was a very prosperous one. They had rich farmland, livestock, food supplies, nice houses, nicer than the Americans had. They had really nice houses. The Americans and the United came in and took all the animals. And then the Mohawk Chapel, they went in and turned it into a tavern and a stable. It had been a church. Who was in Fort Hunter? Because the men, the able-bodied men, would have been those who wanted to fight for the British side, would have been out on skirmishes. So who was left? The women, the children, the elderly. So that's who was left, and they were really in danger. So Captain John and Captain Isaac Hill and a man, I want to get his name right, Canadagia Johannes, he was a Bear Clan chief in Fort Hunter. They organized the people to leave. There were a group of about 6 or 7 families who didn't want to go. I think they had a really fairly miserable time, and eventually they did have to leave, but not everybody left at the same time. There was, so they were on their way out, moving towards Saratoga, New York, and there was a man by the name of Big Clear Sky, or Karong Yagigoa, aka David Loft. And a small party of men set out from Saratoga to connect with this group being led by Captain John and guide them to Saratoga. Near Saratoga, this group were attacked. Captain John was wounded, and Captain Isaac Hill's brother was killed. Yeah, Big Clear Sky, or David Loft, was not Mohawk. Some people say that he was Stockbridge Indian, and Stockbridge is one of those places where they had First Nations people from all over the place, so exactly what he was, we don't know. Other people say he was a St. Francis Indian, and I think that's a place or area where you had multiple First Nations. However, he is the one who brought the name Loft to this community. So we still have Loft today, so all thanks to David.
How did he get the name?
He exchanged it with a British officer that he had a really good relationship with in the British military. And so they did a name exchange. Yeah.
Cool.
And that's still a name here, which is why. So things did not go very well in Saratoga. Captain Burgoyne wasn't having a very good time, and so most of the Mohawk group that was there decided to leave. In late September, early October, about 150 of them. But they left in little family-based groupings, and they didn't all have immediate success getting out of what becomes New York State. Some went by way of a place called Fort Edward, which is south of Lake George, and they were captured, about 50 of them. And they were taken by the Americans, and eventually they got rescued the next year, but they didn't make it to Lachine in 1777. The main group, now about 100 people, they go to Ticonderoga, and then they cross Lake Champlain in boats, and if we go to image number 3, so this is another representation. So this is the area of Fort Hunter. This is that they didn't go up straight like that. It was kind of up to here, but there's where Lachine is, and that's where you still have to get to. And it would have been late October. It would have been getting colder. A really difficult journey. There was another, there were other guides. So we have David Loft is one guide, but there were other guides, and they were Delawares. There were 2 brothers called Peter Brant and Brant Brant. And that's part of the reason why Brant becomes a surname here, is because of these individuals who become attached to the Fort Hunter Mohawks, who stayed in Lachine and actually come down to this area. So, in the late 1870s, a man by the name of Lyman Draper corresponded with and visited people here to get their stories. And so what I have, I've got some quotes from some of the individuals who talking about leaving Mohawk Valley. So if we can go to image number 4. I don't get to do this very often, but we have a photograph of the lady who gave the testimony. So there she is. That is Mrs. Lydia Martin. She is the mother of Dr. Juanadeka. And who has reading number 1?
I do.
Reading number 1? You do. Sorry.
That's okay.
Trish, do you mind me asking what was the person whose name that was interviewing people?
Lyman Draper. Just as an aside, he was in Wisconsin, and he wanted to write a biography of Joseph Brant, and he researched and researched and collected and collected and collected and researched, and then he died. And there's no book. What you have is his notes, and so part of it is this testimony.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I thought Mr. Martin was from Six Nations.
Yes, he was.
So she was at Lachine when Draper? No, 1800. She'd be here. She'd be here.
Yeah.
So
Actually, she was at Six Nations then, but her community was the 400 Mohawks. She's the granddaughter of Captain Isaac Hill and Lydia John.
yeah.
Okay.
How did she? Okay, it's another question. I just want to know how she ended up at Six Nations.
She married a man from Six Nations.
And left here.
Yes.
Okay.
And so Dr. O was born at Six Nations, but then he comes back here.
Right. Okay.
Dr. O's wife was from here.
Yeah, that's right. Ellen, yeah.
Okay. Miss Lydia Martin. When the war broke out, the Mohawks resolved to take the king's side, and all the nation stated, save a few families. Ms. Martin thinks only 3 remaining for Lachine, where they would be safe. As Brant was most the object of the Americans, he was placed in front, and all trudged along. Ms. Martin's mother was then but 3 years old, and of the party, and used to relate, she remembered, they would stop at some of the houses on the way and get buttermilk. The only food they took with them was parched cornmeal, called in the Mohawk Ono Quitsara, of which each carried as much as he could. They were pursued by the Americans and 6 Mohawk women lagging behind with their heavy loads. Heavy loads. Lagging behind with their heavy loads, were overtaken and made prisoners, and were put in prison and kept a long time, suffering much during their incarceration. Ms. Martin knew one of these women at Bay of Quinte. The few Mohawk families that were left on the Mohawk, Ms. Martin says, were compelled to join the others, and she thinks before the close of the war, one of the lagging families was named Claus.
Any clauses in there? Okay. The next reading is from Margaret Green Moses, the daughter of Old John Green. Reading number 2.
The graves in the rear guarded the women and their children. John Green among them were pursued in considerable distance. 6 Mohawk women and 1 child were taken by the Americans. 1 afterwards, Miss Seth Powellus, who lived to be aged. The party suffered greatly for what was provisions.
Next is the testimony of Chief Thomas Green, the son of Old John Green. Reading number 3.
Okay, so reading number 3, Chief Thomas Green, son of Old John Green. The Americans wanted the Mohawks to remain at their homes and take no part in the war, but so firmly attached were they to the king that they would not listen to his advice. They started to retire in a body to Canada. Captain John was in the rear to protect the women and children. They were overtaken and attacked on the way, and those in front fell back to aid the rear guard, and Captain John was wounded. This is his Draper's I guess, comments?
No, that's the source, and then
Oh, the
just
source.
carry on, yeah.
Okay. And it says the retreating Indians became nearly starved. Children would cry of hunger, camped out, and the Indian hunters went out in every direction to hunt, killing only a few birds and made them into gruel, so as to go as far as possible, but afforded the hungry scarcely a spoonful apiece, with small bits of the scantily meat. They were then nearly 2 days' travel to Lachine, and without food, the journey was tardy, as the children could had to walk in their enfeebled condition, and the smaller ones had to be carried.
Okay, not very nice, really not very nice. Reading number 4, Mrs. Elizabeth Locke Powlis.
So Mrs. Elizabeth Powell's daughter of Catherine Hill and John Locke, granddaughter of Captain Isaac Hill and Whitney Thomas. There were a few men to guide the women and children. American Indians followed and overtook them and killed some, once on an island, and killed 3 of their number. One Margaret Penn, who married Seth Powlis when young, was captured and kept prisoner a while, and finally got to the Seneca chief, and stayed some time. She was 15 when she found her surviving kindred, 2 younger brothers. Those who fled from the Mohawk Valley had only parched corn and suffered every hardship.
Okay, and reading number 5, Mrs. Ellen Hill Miracle.
The retreat from the Mohawk to Lachine. 3 were killed by pursuing Americans. The Indians ambuscaded in the woods and had a fight when the Americans came up, who were not numerous and were beaten back. Captain Isaac Hill's brother was among the killed. This retreat was in the fall of the year, as the Mohawks had large hogs in their pens fattening these and their cattle they left behind, hiding in the ground such valuables as they could not carry. These losses were made good by the British government.
Right, so one of the goods was the silver, the church stuff of Queen Anne's silver. One of the goods that they buried before they left. So most everybody gets to Lachine in late October, mid-October, something like that. We don't have a good number of sources that describe what it was like at Lachine. But when we do have it, doesn't sound very good. So at Lachine, Captain John found his friend Daniel Claus. And Daniel Claus set about getting supplies so that the 400 Mohawks could at least build something to winter over in. So they found a suitable plot of grounds in the woods near Lachine, where they built huts for themselves and were supplied with food and clothing during the winter. And in the spring, they made gardens for putting in crops. The next winter, they moved further into the woods in order to have better access to firewood. In the source, there's a kind of a story that the landowner wasn't very happy about the 400 Mohawks being there and kind of wanted them further away. I'm not too sure. Anyway, so who is left there? We're kind of in the same situation as who had to leave from Fort Hunter. The men, the able-bodied men, Captain John, Captain Isaac, they would have been out on skirmishes. Left behind are the women, the children, and the elderly. They were homesick. They weren't familiar with Quebec. Colonel Daniel Claus described it as a, quote, not very pleasant settlement and a, quote, melancholy situation. And in October of 1778, Claus reports illness among them due to a lack of good provisions. They had been given poor quality clothing to winter over with, and they weren't getting adequate, like, fresh provisions. They were relying too much on salt pork. So they had like a vitamin deficiency. It wasn't very nice. Plus, they had lost everything. Their homes, their gardens, their animals, their goods. In 1779, the war is still going on. Captain John raises the issue of these grievances. the loss of their lands, the conditions at Lachine, what's going on with Colonel Guy Johnson, and at that time he's the superintendent overseeing everything. Promises had been made to the Six Nations in 1775, and the Governor Guy Carleton had told them,
Go now and fight for your possessions, and whatever you lose of your property during the war, the king will make up to you when peace returns.
okay. And then in April of 1779, Frederick Haldeman, who is the new guy in charge, he's the governor and commander-in-chief, recognized Carleton's promise. So that it is Carleton's promise. So he recognizes that. And he promises sort of like to commit himself to that promise. And so he says,
Some of the Mohawks of the villages of Cantahary, Tyandarogo, and Kawago, whose settlements there had been upon account of their steady attachment to the king's service and the interests of government ruined by the rebels, having informed me that their predecessor, Sir Guy Carleton, was pleased to promise, as soon as the present troubles were at an end, that same should be restored at the expense of government to the state they were in before these broke out, and said promise appearing to me just, I do hereby notify the same and assure them the said promise, as far as in me lies, shall be faithfully executed as soon as that happy time comes.
so they had to set about evaluating what that loss actually was, and they did. In 1784, they actually did like an inventory of losses, and starting with the total estimates. Go ahead.
Total of the estimate of lands, buildings, grain, cattle, movables, etc. of the Mohawk Indians that fled from General Burgoyne's army at Saratoga to Canada in autumn 1777, and were settled by government in the woods near Lachine. Land arable and rich, 3,185 pounds. Buildings, cattle, and movables, etc., 3,011 pounds. Grain left in barns and barracks, 234. So New York currency pounds, 6,430.
That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. So if any of you is desperately interested, I do have the document. The document, a part of it is in French. That's the most interesting part, actually, is in French. And they talk about, in detail, what had been left behind. The harvested grain included wheat, peas, oats, and Indian corn. For Captain John, Captain Isaac, Paul, Suzanne, Marie, Marguerite, Seth, and Louis. And it names them each with how much they had of each grain. It reports the acreage of land and the value of the land held by Captain John, Captain Isaac, somebody called Creutis, Suzanne, Marguerite, Paul, David, Lydia, Lawrence, Maria, Louis, Rhea, Marie, Seth, and Nakian. The report also goes into detail about their farm goods and some household goods. So they left behind houses and barns, sleighs, carriages, plows and harrows, wagons, fat pigs and little pigs, horses and cows, hens, beaver traps, sheep, silverware, and porcelain. So this is all the stuff that they had to be compensated for. At the end of the American Revolution, the Peace Treaty, 1783, the British and the Americans come to terms, and their allies are left out of the peace process altogether. The issues of restoration, loss of land were not part of the negotiations, and not just the Mohawks, all the Six Nations people, all the other allies, the Western Indians, and no one was very happy about this. But the Mohawks in particular were irate that the British took it upon themselves to treaty away lands that weren't even theirs. But the reality was they could not go home. The Americans had already started on their way of cleansing the area of First Nations people in New York State. And they were, even though the Oneidas had been their allies, they weren't very nice to them either. The Mohawks were also furious that the war was even declared over. They wanted to continue to fight. Captain John wrote to Daniel Claus about what the end of the war meant to his people. So reading number 6, letter from Captain John.
Captain John's letter, 8th of January, 1784. We do not think they have beaten us. Our minds are still strong and determined to carry on the war. The disgrace is almost killing us. We warriors, the Gariaga, have steadfastly set our minds to fight to the end. We are joined with the king, but you can withdraw if you like.
Yeah, so we'll still fight. You can go home if you want to. We'll still fight. If we have a look at image number 5, it is Captain John's letter in the language. No, not next one then. That's translation. Ah, there we go. Nice.
So Trish, have you actually seen that document? Like, did you take that picture?
I did not. It was on microfilm. It's part of a collection called the Clause Papers. And there are a number in the language in the Clause Papers. So, and this has, the translation is available too. Although, and I don't know if the language people downstairs have actually looked. I've always been curious about that. If we had language speakers today taking a look at that, would it be the same kind of translation? Because it would have been I don't know exactly when it would have been translated, to tell you the truth.
So that's in French then?
No, that's in Mohawk.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, that's in Mohawk. Okay, so we make it to June 1783. The 400 Mohawk are still stuck at Lachine. Haldeman, General Haldeman, Governor General and in charge of all the forces, has promised restoration of the lands. And now that the war is over, he can't just say, well, that's what I'll do. He actually has to do it. So the records seem to indicate that Joseph Brant and Captain John did come and visit this area, but I don't think they came together. I think they came separately. But they came through this area to investigate a place where they could find a new home, because they can't go home, and they don't want to stay in Lachine. This place had an advantage, was that they were going to be building a new military fort at the Kingston area. So there would have been military assistance. So Captain John decides for one place, and Joseph Brant decides, no, I don't like it so much, I'm going to go down to the river. So image number 6.
Trish, my grandfather actually told me, he died when I was 11, so how old I was when he did this, that I must have been the only one who adopted. He said, we never lost a battle. He said, our allies gave up.
Yeah.
So that was the story that went down, right?
Yeah. Oh, they did not, no, they never capitulated.
Yeah.
They got, not even negotiate, they were left out of the process completely.
Yeah.
This is dated 1783, and it is an estimate of what the Mohawks from Lachine, where they want to be. Now that's Lake Ontario, and we're looking at it this way, down,
Do you want me
right?
to flip it around, Trish? The writing will be upside down, but it'll actually be the right.
Well, let's do both. So it's the Mohawks from Lachine, and that's the area. And you can see, like, that's Prince Edward County. That's a huge area. So that's what they said. You made the promise, restoration, you're going to compensate us for our losses. This is what we want. And we don't have too many documents like this. So this is an I can't tell. Can't tell, because I think it does myself, but because the dotted lines go here, but it sure looks like they wanted Prince Edward County too. Yes.
Have you ever met George Reed over there? He's a historian. He has aerial maps from like space maps that shows where all the burial grounds are over there. So he would be interesting to talk to.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay. So let's go to image number 7, which is another letter from Captain John with reading number 7. So it's now 1784. It's April. They really want to get away. So who's got reading number 7?
I have Captain John's letter in 7th April 1784. As regards now to where we should settle, some are looking to Oswego, but as for us, right from the first, we have decided to go near Gatarockville. To both moves you have said, let it be done. You have also stated that those who are at Lachine should move away this spring, and let no one be left behind.
So there's been a lot of talk about why some people here, and most of the Six Nations went to Grand River. There was an issue of security. It would be nice to know that you were going to be right by a military base, if you like, a military fort. Maybe Captain John wanted to be further away from the Americans because at Grand River you're not that far away from the Americans, or it could have to do with the birthplace of the peacemaker. It could have to do with having Six Nations communities on both ends of the lake, which again is a military thing. We just don't know for sure.
If you read all that stuff and try and put it together and digest it, there was personality conflict, if you will, between the two, even back in the valley. Certainly there was military considerations, like for the defense of the newly formed Canada, it was very strategic. Peacemaker, all of those factors can come into play right there. Yeah. It's I don't know, every time you read something and you pick up another piece right there, it keeps coming back. They're just like normal people, okay? Just like normal people, but their stories are just incredible what they had to go through. And if you get the numbers there and see what they went through, especially according to Draper right there, to think that just a handful of those people were left, out of us Mohawks, and then, that's like genocide, like we were pretty well wiped out and we bounced back pretty good. So, everybody's slamming our ancestors and our grandfathers for losing our ways, but if they didn't do what they did, we wouldn't be here today. It was quite the job. I don't know if I can handle it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and you don't know unless you test it, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay, so they made this decision to split. And Haldeman's not very happy about this because he actually does want all the Six Nations to be together, but you're right, there's personality conflicts between Joseph Grant and Captain John. Probably a whole lot of other reasons why. But the promise had been made. They now have a place to go to. They've made the decision. Now the government, the British government, has to make a surrender or treaty with the people who are living here at the time, and those are the Mississaugas. So if we could take a look at image number 8, which is the Crawford Purchase. So before there can be a Simcoe Deed, before there can be the landing, there had to be the Crawford Purchase. So William Crawford was sent out in the fall of 1783 to negotiate with the Mississaugas who were living in the area. And there's a purchase, which is called the Crawford Purchase, and the date is the 9th of October, 1783. And it said, that's a pretty big purchase. That goes all the way up to the end of Ontario, right, in the beginning of that. The purple is the Mohawk tract. That is an extraordinarily large area of land. There's no piece of paper that has the Crawford Purchase. We only have correspondence that talks about the negotiations and what the compensation was. So Captain William Crawford says the Mississauga chiefs demanded clothing for all the families they had under their care, guns for those who didn't have any guns, powder and ball for winter hunting, and as much coarse red cloth as will make a dozen coats, and just as many laced hats was the compensation for that. It's insane, right? But he also reported something really interesting. He reported that there were 3 Onondaga chiefs at the negotiations. They had come down from Montreal. They were present and approved much of what the Mississaugas had done. So, Six Nations knew what was happening here. I wish it's tantalizing, right? You just got this is like a throwaway line. Oh, and by the way, there were 3 Onondagas here. So the Six Nations knew. And from the Six Nations perspective, this wasn't Mississauga land anyway, right? So
Do they have, dates when the Mississauga Indians first came here?
Oh, yes, it's, with the beaver hunting wars, before the Great Peace, I'm trying to think, is it before the Great Peace, 1701, or is it the late 16?
Late 1600s.
Late 1600s?
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is, Amy and I, we've been doing a little bit of stuff about this, don't get to do it very often, but the thing is, I've talked to Mississaugas and they'll talk, or you'll read something and it'll say, well, the Mississaugas came down and just sent the Six Nations home. The thing is, we're finding them popping up everywhere where they're not supposed to be. So, didn't exactly kick them all home. They kept coming back, they were hunting, they were living in the Fort Frontenac area. It's, again, like everything else here, it's more complicated than that. Anyway, they were the ones living in the area, this area, and in the area of what would become Kingston. So they were the ones, and this is the British policy, right? The Royal Proclamation is that they would make treaties with the people who were living in the area. So that's what they did. Okay, so we're getting really close to the move. January 1784, how many people are we dealing with? There is a census. There's no names on the census. 114 Mohawks and 11 Delaware are living at Lachine. Well, that's the framework. And then in April of 1784, Captain John, if we go to image number 7, we'll go back to another letter of Captain John's. This is him starting to talk about making plans for this new place that we're going to.
Image 9, sorry. Image 9.
Image 7. Reading number 8.
Captain John's letter in Mohawk, 7th of April, 1784. Brother, with regard to what you say, move away this spring and not one be left behind. This is our intention, to move away as soon as the ice is gone. Not one shall be left here, even where you to ask us to stay on. We want to receive the deed from you for the land you gave us, the land where we shall dwell.
Okay, so that's April 1784. We want a deed. We want a deed. He knew without a deed it was going to be so hard to protect this new homeland. So this is a request, and you're going to hear it over and over and over again. Not all the Fort Hunter Mohawks make the decision to come here. Captain Isaac Hill, his son dies at Lachine, so he doesn't come down with the native group. John Green and his family, they decide they're going to go with Joseph Brand. So not all of those 114 Mohawks are going to come to this area. Captain John writes another letter to Daniel Claus, and he's talking about he wants a teacher. So again, he's making plans. We're going to have, you know, we're going to need a sawmill, we're going to need a teacher, we're going to need a deed. So image number 9. Who has reading number 9?
I remember that. It says Captain John's letter in Mohawk, 10th of April, 1784. With regard to what we wrote you the other day about increasing a little more the size of the land as fixed as Governor Hallman, the land where we are to settle, we would be made happy to have the matter hastened so as to set our mind definitely at ease. He has said to us, I will give them the paper, in brackets deed. We are now impatient to move away.
Okay, so spring 1784. And the deed is right on top of his mind. He's thinking of it a lot. Captain John and his group leave for the Bay of Quinte. The best estimate is 20 to 22 families, and they're going by canoe or bateau. The earliest story about the landing is Captain John himself, when he's talking in the minutes of 1800, if any of you were aware of that. Who has reading number 10?
Just before that, though, they had spent 6 winters at Lachine?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
It was time to go.
It was starting, yeah.
The tribe now here fixed on this place, and another tribe fixed on the Grand River. Colonel Claus wished to know what Indians were going to the Bay of Quinte and what to the Grand River. I told him I meant to send myself down at the Bay of Quinte among the Loyalists and Captain Brant at the Grand River. I informed Colonel Claus I was not fond of going to the Grand River, owing to their being so near to the Americans, and told him I thought I could not live in peace so near these people, and made choice of this place as being a greater distance from them. The Americans are like a worm that cuts off the corn as soon as it appears. Sir John Johnson and Colonel Claus told us on leaving Lachine they were happy we were going to a place we had appointed for ourselves. They hoped we should be happy and live in peace. When we quit Lachine, Captain Isaac and his family thought proper to quit us and go to the Grand River to live there. On the 10th of May, 1784, Sir John Johnson and Colonel Claus desired us all to come together, but Captain Isaac paid no attention to what they said, and he separated from us and went to the Grand River. Sir John Johnson and Colonel Claus also told me to guide my people in a proper manner, and as we were going to a country where there were other people, Mississaugas, who ought to cultivate their friendship and live happily together. We arrived here on the 22nd of May and found a great number of the native Mississaugas at this place, and we were very glad to see us, and we were happy to be met in so friendly of a manner. We then held a council with the Mississaugas and informed them that our great father had purchased these lands for us, and that we had come to sit down on them.
So it's the earliest story that we have about the landing. The Mississaugas would not have been an unknown people to Captain John, because they were also allies of the British during the American Revolution and had been involved in that Fort Stanwix siege. So I think Captain John, who had political skills, would have been able to have a very positive relationship with the Mississaugas. And I know there is one letter where the government is sick and tired of Captain John writing letters on behalf of the Mississaugas for provisions. And it's just, not only is he asking for provisions for his own, but he's also asking for the Mississaugas to get help too. And they're just fed up with them. They're trying to reduce expenses, and he wants them to spend more money. So the Fort Hunter Mohawks, the Lachine Mohawks, are now the Mohawks at the Bay of Quinte. That very early time frame, 1784 to 1793, we don't have a lot of correspondence. Mainly it's Captain John writing letters. And the letters do show his priorities, and the main one was to get a deed. He was fixated on this. He knew that there were more and more loyalists coming, because it wasn't just the Six Nations people who came up here. It was everybody who had been an ally of the British in New York State. There were all kinds of people, United Empire Loyalists, as they would come to be known as. But there were thousands of them, and they all needed land. If we take a look to image 10, I don't know how good this is. So this is in June of 1784. This is Captain John's sketch. This is our second sketch of what the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte want. And it's hard, it's not a great copy, and it's sideways, so, hold on, yeah, that's okay. So again, okay, so this again is, it's really hard. That's the Napanee Bay.
Did I do it that way?
Yeah, I think that's Napanee Bay, and it goes all the way across to, I'm thinking it's like Trenton or something. Not too sure. So that big area, and it's a black line all the way around. It goes over the bay into Prince Edward County, sorry, and there's no northern boundary. So that's a big black area. If you try 10A, I've got, it might be one of his labels on it. Right, okay. So we have Crawford Island. It has locations for sawmills where there's enough water power. I mean, it really has been around, looking around.
The run of it, go for this way. So cat off before on the right.
Okay, so this is the right way.
Well, I don't know if I call it the right way, but.
So this is, that there is on the north shore of Bay of Plenty. Okay, so that you're still looking in the Napanee Bay and all the way across to Trenton. And then this is for Prince Edward County. And the dotted line includes at least part of Prince Edward County. In July, it's only July 1784, he's writing again about the need for a deed and the pressure that they're getting from the loyalists. Reading number 11.
You doubtless remember that I have said in a letter to you that we should be glad to have our land measured as soon as possible. For the loyalists would try to get some of our land. It now come to pass, as I thought. Major Holland and his son were here yesterday for to get some land from us for loyalists, but I could not spare of any besides that Sir John Johnson and I have fixed the boundaries, etc. Please, sir, to cast in affairs or to help us concerning a charter for our land.
Okay, so this is not only requesting a deed, but it's also a request for a survey. That's going to be really important too. Okay, image number 11. In 1785, this plan or sketch was done, and it's one of the earliest that we have that actually shows the Mohawk settlement here. Was it this way? And counterclockwise. Okay, here we go. There's the date. Mohawk settlement. So, that's pretty early, 1785. You've only been here a year. Then in 1786, there is a description of the lands that the Crown wants to preserve from the Mohawk. Now, this is not the Mohawk saying this is what we want. This is the government saying this is the land we want to set aside.
Description of the land reserved for the Mohawks on the north side of the Bay of Quinte, 1786. A description of the land reserved for the settlement of the Mohawk Nation, situated on the north side of the Bay of Quinte, containing about 12 miles in front, and in depth to the west boundary of the purchase made by the Crown from the Mississauga Nation. Bounded in from on the south by the Bay of Quinte, including a small island called John's Island, which lies opposite the Mohawk village, and on the west by the mouth of the Anguissoga River, now called the Shannon, and the township of Thurlow, and of the east by the mouth of Bones Creek and the township of Richmond, and on the north by the west boundary of the purchase made by the Crown from the Mississauga Nation.
Okay, so it's the land between Thurlow and Richmond, said to be about 12 miles across. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Now, we know this isn't what Captain John wanted. This is not even close to what Captain John wanted. But on the other hand, we don't even know if Captain John knew about this document. Right? We have no way of knowing that. In 1787, they started surveying the townships in the area, but not here. They surveyed the other townships. So they surveyed the township at, let's see, Richmond was done in 1787, and the front part of Thurlow was done in 1787. So what you have left is going to be what the Mohawks of Bay Quinte get. But it's not surveyed yet, so we don't know how big it is. They didn't do a proper survey of any of the portion of the Mohawk tract until 1820, and we'll be finding out about that during the bus trip.
I think our ancestors were really, they had totally lost faith in the British at that point, and they were only acting out of self-preservation at that point. And you can just see the boundary shrinking
And they wouldn't have known, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in December of 1787, the Deputy Surveyor General is a man by the name of John Collins. And he writes to Lord Dorchester about the lands for the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. And he says it's a tract of 12 miles fronting on the Bay of Quinte by 15 miles in depth. So 12 across and 15 deep. But when Captain John was informed about the boundaries being fixed this way, he was furious. He knew that he was dealing with a lot less land than he had been promised. Right? Remember, Carleton's promise. Haldeman's promise. We're going to restore you to the way you were before. Right? So Collins tells Lord Dorchester,
I conferred with Sir John Johnson respecting the boundary to be fixed between Mohawk settlement and that of the Loyalists, and called twice on Captain John as chief of that village to inform him of the mode of settlement we had agreed on. He being absent, I acquainted his wife, and accordingly proceeded to fix the boundaries, leaving a tract of 12 miles fronting on the Bay of Quinte by 15 miles in depth for the use of the Mohawk settlement. This extensive tract, it appears, is by no means satisfactory to Captain John, who I am informed from good authority has spoken in very threatening terms.
I can well imagine. There's a bit of an explanation in a letter from the 21st of April, 1788, from Sir John Johnson, writing to Captain John to explain that, surprise, surprise, the Loyalists come first, right? And that having the eastern boundary of the Mohawk Tract at the Napanee River would be injurious to the Loyalists. So here's a confirmation, in not just in a plan, but in text, that the eastern boundary, it should have been at the Napanee River. But we still don't have a deed, we don't have a survey, and the amount of land that was once promised this big is now this big, and we're not there yet. In 1791 is the creation of Upper Canada, Lower Canada, and that will be the government body who will be looking after land. And so the claims of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte go before that level of government. There's draft minutes of a meeting to state that the townships of Richmond and Thurlow have been surveyed and were surveyed in 1787, and the only land in question now is the land that remains in between. So guess what? That's what you're going to get. 24th of December, 1791, a report on the committee investigating Indian claims decided
that an act of the provincial legislature or a grant under the Great Seal of the province be made in favor of the principal chiefs in behalf of their nation or persons in trust for them forever.
Right. So we're getting closer. In late March 1793, the Surveyor General was sent a plan of the lands that was to be the Mohawk Tract, and he's requested to make a copy of it. But the northern boundary is to remain blank. So they're still, they know the eastern boundary, they know the western boundary, they don't know the northern boundary yet. 2 days later, the decision is made on where the northern boundary is going to be. You notice that the Mohawks are not involved in this, right? This is government doing this. Oh my, the northern boundary is going to not be 15 miles deep, it's only going to be 13 miles deep. So, shave a couple miles off the top. So on the 1st of April, 1793, the minutes of council, Navy Hall, County of Lincoln, Captain John, Captain Isaac, and Captain Aaron all get their land grant because they were in the military. They all that gets done. And then they get it first, and then they set to establishing where the Mohawk Tract is going to be. So it was at this meeting, it was resolved that the description of land for the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte previously agreed to by the government. It wasn't an agreement with the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte and the government. No, this was the government agreeing with itself where the boundaries would be. And that a grant
be made under the Great Seal of the province in favor of the principal chiefs on behalf of their nations or tribe as above mentioned, or persons in trust for them forever.
Well, let's look at image number 12. 11? Yeah. Not really. That's it. Okay, back up. Because this is what everybody has. Hopefully, everybody has a copy of this. So the dimensions of the tract were supposed to be 12 miles in front along the bay and 13 miles back. In 1793, the Simcoe Deed sets this aside, but there's no instruction to have a survey done. So they really didn't know how wide it was. Any guesses? Is it 12 miles wide? No, it isn't. Our best estimate is 10.2 miles wide. We don't have a copy of the original Simcoe Deed. There are minutes of that meeting, but we don't actually have an original Simcoe Deed. What we have is a copy of what was done in 1809. Now, I don't know the history about that. It could be that it was just in those minutes from Navy Hall, and that later on it was done in that beautiful handwriting with ribbons and seals and stuff like that. That could very well be. We don't even know exactly when the community got a copy of it. Kind of nice. It would be nice to know when you got a copy of it. We do know that you did have one prior to 1816, and that Peter John, Captain John's son, walked with it and didn't bring it back. I think they had to request another one. And then sometimes the community has it, and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes the government has it, and sometimes they don't. Anyway, so to get back to the very beginning, with this being the anniversary of the Simcoe Deed. It's called the Simcoe Deed or the Simcoe Grant because it was John Graves Simcoe was Lieutenant Governor of Canada at the time. It's also known as Treaty 3.5, but that's because when they put it into a whole group of treaties and surrenders, that's the number that they gave it, 3.5. So, there's only one other one like it, and that's one for Six Nations. You don't hear Six Nations talking about it very much. They rely more on the Haldeman Grant. I haven't been able to find a Haldeman Grant for here. Keep hoping. I think the people, I think Captain John expected that. I think Captain John expected to get a Haldeman Grant and didn't get it. Ended up with the Simcoe Deed. The lands described are not just for the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, they are for the chiefs, warriors, women, and people of the Six Nations. Nice to have women in there. Don't always get women in there. It is not a treaty that takes land away. It's a land grant. So it's not like a numbered treaty. It's not like Robinson Superior, Robinson Huron treaties. It's not like that at all. But it grants the land for a special reason, and it gets back to the losses that were suffered, the military losses, the community losses, everything, having to leave the valley. Right? Who has number 12? Reading number 12.
Know ye that whereas the attachment and fidelity of the chief warriors and people of the Six Nations to us and our government have been made manifest on divers occasions by their spirited and zealous exertions and by the bravery of their conduct. And we, being desirous of shewing our approbation of the same, and in recompense of the losses they may have sustained, of providing a convenient tract of land under our protection for a safe and comfortable retreat for them and their posterity, have our special grace, certain knowledge and promotion given, and by these presents do give and grant.
One other odd thing about this particular grant, no Mohawk of the Bay of Quinte signed it. It's a government grant. Reading number 13. 13?
Oh, you want me to change my glasses, don't you?
I do.
Well, it is too. To them, the chief warriors, women, and people of the said Six Nations, and to have for the use and behoof of them and their heirs forever freely and clearly, and from all manner of rents, fines, or services, giving and granting, and by these presents confirming to the said chiefs, warriors, women, and people of the said Six Nations, and their heirs, the full and entire possession, use, benefit, and advantage of the said district of territory of land to be held and enjoyed by them in the most free and ample manner, and according to the several customs and usages by them, the said chiefs, warriors, women, and people of the said Six Nations, of securing to them the free and undisturbed possession and enjoyment of the same. That's a mouthful.
It is, okay, so within the Simcoe Deed, there is a protection against alienation of land, reading number 15.
Reading 14 from Simcoe Deed. It is our royal will and pleasure that no transfer, alienation, conveyance, sale, gift, exchange, lease, property, or possession shall at any time be had, made, or given of the said district or territory, or any part or parcel, therefore, by any of the said chief warriors, women, and people of the Six Nations, to any other nation or body of people, persons whatsoever, other than among themselves the said chiefs, warriors, women, and people of the said Six Nations. This is a tongue twister. But that any such transfer, alienation, conveyance, sale, gift, exchange, lease, or possession shall be null and void and of no effect whatever, and that no person or person shall possess or occupy the said district or territory or any part or parcel thereof by or under pretense of any such alienation or conveyance as foresaid, or by or under any pretense whatever, under pain of our severe displeasure.
Okay, and then within it, there is also protection against trespass, reading number 15.
And that in the case any person or persons other than the said chiefs, warriors, women, and people of the said Six Nations shall under pretense of any such title as aforesaid presume to possess or occupy the said district or territory or any part or parcel thereof, that it shall and may be lawful of us our heirs and successors at any time thereafter to enter upon the land so occupied and possessed by any other person or persons other than the said chiefs, warrior, women, and people of the said Six Nations, and them the said intruders thereof and therefrom wholly to dispose and evict, and to resume the same to ourselves, our heirs, and our successors.
Right. But, you know there's that, right? There was a way, of course, for you to surrender the land. Reading number 16.
Provided always, nevertheless, that if at any time the said chiefs, warriors, women, and people of the said Six Nations should be inclined to dispose of and surrender their use and interest in the said district or territory, that same shall be so purchased only for us in our name at some public meeting or assembly of the chiefs, warriors, and people of the said Six Nations, to be held for that purpose by the governor, lieutenant governor, or person administering our government in our province of Upper Canada.
Okay, so that's the Simcoe Deed. It's not till 1820 where you have part of this, and it's the middle part gets surveyed, so that you know how wide the territory actually is. When that surrender happens, what gets called the Mohawk Tract, so this whole thing, the Mohawk Tract, gets renamed. And they rename it Tyndonega. And I really don't think that you guys had anything to do with it. I really don't. I think it's because he was the most famous Mohawk that they could think of. And so they renamed it as Tyndonega Township. It took almost 10 years for Captain John to get a deed for this community. And you've heard it. He asked time and time again, a deed, a survey, a deed, a patent, a deed, a charter, a deed. I don't like to think about the consequences if you haven't got this. I really don't. So, I hope a lot of you are going to go on that bus trip and you're going to do the boundaries of the original Mohawk route. I think that's so cool. I did a little mini trip like that with an Araras, Brent, and the late, great Brent Barty. And we had a very cool time. So I hope that everybody does too. And I said to my mother, I didn't know how to finish this. So I said, well, it's sort of like, you're still here. You're still here. So, yeah, we'll grow up.